fellow comments, quite a few of the books we've talked about here have had to do with dreams and how dreams change our relationship to reality. And as we're going through the works of H.P. Lovecraft, of course, with the theme of cosmic horror, he was going to touch upon dreams because there is an epistemic horror of dreams. There is something terrible about it. Because while you're dreaming, you're 100% convinced that what you were experiencing is real. And then you awaken to a reality that is more real. And you become convinced that this new reality is what was real. The problem is, of course, how do you know you won't again wake up into another reality that feels even more real? Our experience of dreams make things like the Matrix kind of an epistemic necessity that we'll have to imagine that it is possible that everything we think we perceive is just an illusion and will at some point give weight to something far greater, a greater truth. And so how H.P. Lovecraft deals with this is in his story Polaris. There is a man who appears to be in a world very similar to ours, is in a stone building, looking out the window, looking at the night sky with all the constellations that we know. And he talks about how he's being tortured by Polaris. So there are the other constellations that are kind of circling around Polaris, the North Star. But the North Star, Polaris, it does not move. And it peers at him like it's trying to give a message, but there is no message to be given. Until one night, there were the Northern Lights, and in the Northern Lights you can see a city where people speak a language unlike any he's ever heard, but he can still understand. He comes to be able to see the city in his dreams on the nights when it's cloudy. And he comes to know the city more and more, and he wants to know his relationship to his city. And finally, he becomes someone within that city, and he knows the place. They're in a war, they're being invaded by foreign people, and it's his job to man the watchtower during the night, because everyone else has to fight, but he has the best eyes, but he's unable physically to fight. And he's struggling to stay awake. He hasn't slept in days. And Polaris is there, and it's singing a lullaby to him. And he falls asleep, and he dreams that he is in that world of the House of Stone. And he tries to tell people about his experience, that he is dreaming. He tries to beg them to wake him up, but they tell him that his reality is not real. So I think there are kind of two interpretations to this story, both of which I find very challenging. One interpretation is that the dream isn't real, the city isn't real, he's just crazy. And that is another epistemic crisis that we have. We see that there are people who see things that are not there, they talk to things that are not there. And how can we know that, given that their reality, their sense of reality, what they are convinced of is true, is plainly untrue? How can we know that what we see, what we perceive, is not also a hallucination? If there is such a thing as hallucination and insanity in this world, we cannot be safe in our own sanity. We cannot be safe in our own perception of this world. And so he is someone who's dreamed himself into this horrible situation where he has imagined another world that he believes he is a part of, and he can't fully connect to this one. The other interpretation is that the dream is real, and that this reality is the dream, and he is in fact stuck trying to get the figments of his imagination, or whatever demons hold him asleep, to wake him up so that he can go back to the watchtower before the enemies come and destroy his city. So I think I've mentioned this before. There was a philosopher who had a dream that he was a butterfly, and then he woke up and said, how do I not know that I am a butterfly dreaming myself as a man? And so when it comes to this kind of thought, I think it is more than simply a story. It is an assault on our certainty of reality. I don't think it is something that can simply be dismissed or ignored lightly. And honestly, it is something that lives in the back of my mind. What if everything I think I know is just fundamentally true, I think a lot of times you have like a fun Matrix-y story, you get the blue pill or the red pill and you make a choice. But I think probably most often I imagine death. What happens when I die and I wake up to find some other reality, and then this one becomes just a vague memory because it was so unreal, just as a nightmare or a dream is now. And I think these are the kinds of thoughts we all have to grapple with to a certain extent. But I don't think there really is an answer. It's just something that has to be there, ever present. But there has to be a certain level of existential uncertainty just built into the nature of our own existence. I always think, Descartes said that he was more certain of a mathematical proof than he was of his own existence. He imagined that there might be some kind of evil demon, building him a false web of perception. But he always imagined that, the logical proofs and the mathematical proofs within his mind were 100% real. But the thing I always think about, we always have these fundamental truths, going back to the Aristotle even, just basic logic. We have things like the rule of non-contradiction. Something can't both be A and not A at the same time. This is something is built into our perception of reality. We have to take it for granted. The thing I always wonder is, the rule of non-contradiction is false. If something can be A and not A, if our perception of reality is so fundamentally broken, would we ever be able to notice? I don't think we would. I think our perception of reality and reality itself would be so out of step that we would never even be able to come close to actually understanding reality on any meaningful level. And so we're left in this interesting position where I always have this thought in the back of my head. I think it is something I will always struggle with. I think perhaps everyone does to a certain extent. But there's really no practical takeaway to such a deep existential uncertainty. We just have to pretend that it doesn't exist. And we have to pretend that our perception of reality matches reality to some degree. I always think of Kant, who talked about how we don't really know things in themselves. We only know things by our perception of them. And I think he had a kind of faith built into this mismatch between reality and our perception of it. If we take a purely materialistic view and we just think about everything in terms of our perception, we're looking at a world of a series of chemical reactions, really. It would be 100% deterministic at a certain level. It's kind of impossible to imagine something like free will, because when someone makes a choice, they wouldn't be capable of making another choice. You have things like a fire moves, but it doesn't choose to move, because the movement of the fire is determined by the exact nature of, this chemical makeup of the circumstances of the fire. And so a human being would be in a similar position. A human being would be like a fire made of meat, or really kind of like a robot. They'd be a meat automaton. They don't make a choice, when someone chooses whether they want to eat an apple or an orange, it's not that they choose the apple. It's just that they happen to be in a set of circumstances. Just as, the fire doesn't choose to burn blue, it just happens to have fuel that makes it burn blue. But Kant thought, because of this mismatch of our perception and the reality of the thing itself, we could perceive the fire or the person as not making any choice, of just being part of this deterministic chemical reaction, but understand that there is some wiggle room in our ignorance of that person. We can't know the person outside of our perception of them. And so there was a kind of possibility for free will and a soul within our ignorance. Maybe it's a peculiarity of Lovecraft, or of me even, that I find such thoughts deeply disturbing, that we may never know reality. There does seem to be a certain comfort in the fact that things are not limited just in our physical perception of them. By the way, there was another H.P. Lovecraft story that I read and skipped over, a reminiscence of Dr. Samuel Johnson. I just didn't feel like talking about it. But there are two words I looked up while reading it. Pursy, which means like fat and squat. It could also, in another context, mean out of breath. The second word from that story is scrofulous, which means kind of unkempt or scruffy. So it comes from the word scrofula, which was a kind of tuberculosis. So it was like of having that kind of tuberculosis. I looked it up. This is apparently not where scruffy comes from. Scruffy comes from a completely different illness and is actually a cognate with scurvy. Who knew? So for Polaris, the story Polaris, there are two words I looked up as well. There's casement, which is the case around a window that has hinges at the side. So any kind of window you can open on the left or right, that would be a casement. And finally, there's coruscation, which is something that's brilliant and very bright. And so I have been going through the complete works of H.P. Lovecraft, and so if you'd like to talk more about them, you can subscribe. And if you'd like to talk about the last one, Dagon, you can do that over here. But don't forget to give me a like before you go. And remember, good night, good day, good potato.